Well, hello from Starfleet headquarters, where I'm broadcasting today. I put this filter on a few days ago, and now I can't figure out how to turn it off. So I should mention at the start that CBS is the property of, sorry, Star Trek is the property of CBS, and no patent or copyright infringement is intended. I should mention just a couple really quick things before Jen and I get started in the video. One of them is we do apologize that we had audio problems in the last video. Some of you did email us about that. Honestly, folks, what happened is that we had a third microphone that was left live. It was a wireless microphone. It was live during our video, and it was picking up background noise, which was muting some of our other volume. Not going to happen today. Our bad. We apologize. The other thing I want to apologize for is that I do not know what I have. I do not assume I have Omicron particularly, but this week I have been sideswiped by a nasty head cold. So some of you are going to notice my voice is different. And Jen, I may suddenly look away during this video because I will be sneezing.
That's fine. So firstly, I'm going to start calling you Admiral Gurney.
Please.
Secondly, I'm operating in the assumption that you absolutely do have Omicron, because anyone who gets sick this week, statistically speaking, is very likely to have Omicron.
You know, it's interesting. I was saying to you before we got the video going that in the last couple of weeks, just as a result of kind of the end of the holidays, we haven't seen anybody. We saw a bunch of family during the holidays. We largely went to ground after the holidays, and that was because my wife is a teacher, and we were thinking, you know, we'll do all of our socializing early in the break, and then in the back end of the break we'll we'll pull into our own household so that she would be able to test negative and go back to work when the schools reopened, which was supposed to be 2 days ago. Didn't end up happening that way. Now what ended up happening is that only twice in the last 11 days have I been outside my house. On the weekend, I went grocery shopping. On Monday, we got our kids vaccinated. Those are my only two. I mean, I've walked the dog and stuff, but those are the only two places I've gone. And I end up with this. I feel fine. I don't have a fever. I have a sense of taste and smell, but my head is just, ugh. So I wear an N95 whenever I'm out on errands these days. No one else in my household is sick right now, but I feel like crap. Anyway, so it will be noticed in the video. My voice is not what it used to be. Let's get to the meat of it though. Oh, and by the way, I have rapid tests. I haven't used one because it doesn't matter. Like, rapid tests are so scarce right now and they're precious. The schools are closed all next week. We have food in the house. I'm just going to stay home until I feel better. And I'm never going to know if this was winter head cold or if this is Omicron, because getting an actual test in Ontario right now is really hard.
Admiral Gurney, you know, getting an illness is not a moral failing, and you've got nothing to answer for. It's all fine.
I'll report to sickbay later. On our list of topics, let's start with the Omicron one. There isn't a ton to talk about because you and I have actually already done a dispatch where we did a dispatch earlier this week. So this one,
there's nothing more to say. No, I mean, we're not. How are the hospitals in Ontario? The other interesting thing that I'm watching on Omicron is this. I'm wondering if whether or not the situation for the hospitals is going to be different in Alberta versus and Saskatchewan versus Ontario because of our Delta wave. You know, we got smashed by that Delta wave, and basically what happened is, realistically, Omicron or sorry, the Delta wave just ripped through us. I think essentially everyone more or less got it. And I'm wondering if that's providing some protection for us now, because our hospitalization rates are really low right now. Like they're very fine. Whereas I think in Ontario, you guys are starting to see pretty significant upticks.
Well, let me see. Let me pull the latest numbers, which I actually had not looked at today. And just so people know how I relax, currently the tab on my computer I'm closing is 2014-15 Maple Leafs schedule and results. So this is how
cool. I'm teaching myself machine embroidery. So there you go.
Go Leafs go. All right. So hospitalizations are up sharply. Hospitalization levels are rising fast. What hasn't risen as high yet is ICU occupancy, but even that is rising fast. So I'm just looking at today's numbers. We are not at records for either of them yet, but hospitalization and ICU capacity are both up really, really sharply. So,
okay, so to put that into context here, our current hospitalizations in Alberta is like 498 and our ICUs are 64. When we were at the verge of collapse at the height of our Delta wave, our hospitalization, I can't remember offhand what they were like, but our ICUs were closer to 300. So like our ICU is nowhere near, our hospitalizations are up,
Yeah.
but our ICUs are nowhere near. So that's interesting to me. Now, I don't know if that's just a lagging effect. I mean, on the prairies, I would expect to be getting hit later than Ontario anyway. So could just be a lagging effect or could just be a result of Delta. I'm really, really nerdily interested to see how those numbers play out over the next 3 weeks.
The one, you know what? I'm actually going to gut check myself here. We might have broken our hospitalization record, but we're not close for ICU. So the moment where we pushed our system right to the brink would have been in the third wave when our ICUs were about 900 COVID patients.
Mhm.
Today it's 300 something. So we're still well off that mark. But actual overall hospitalizations are up a lot, almost 2,500. Last week, like a week ago, they were 1,100. So we've added 1,300 COVID patients, more than doubled in 7 days. Our experience in Ontario is generally tracking with what we're seeing elsewhere, though. People go into the hospital, they're not as sick, they don't stay as long, fewer of them need the ICU. Some of them need oxygen for a couple of days and then go home.
And then the other thing I would observe is that what we're seeing in most other jurisdictions is that this hits really hard, really fast, but it burns itself out in days. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next week you're starting to see those rates all come down already.
Yeah, maybe they're still going up fast.
They're still in the up, but I'm just saying you're going to hit that
it.
peak really fast, and then it's going to collapse really fast. So it'll be very interesting. I actually think that we're gonna have a really good sense of what's going to happen, probably like in the next 7 days, is my suspicion.
So I don't know if the camera was on me or you, but something incredible just happened. You see that right there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like it came in from the sunlight.
That's sunlight. And well, first of all, it is cool because it looks like it's the San Francisco sun, but also we haven't seen the sun in Toronto in a few days here. So it was nice. Like, oh, that's nice. I shall go look at the blue sky later. The point I wanted to actually make about Omicron, though, is not actually about Omicron itself. I tweeted today. Don't tweet. You shouldn't tweet. It's a bad idea.
What are you tweeting?
But what I was tweeting about was just a couple of things that have collided in my noggin recently. Earlier in the week, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, had said that he wants to piss off the anti-vaxxers. Like he wants to piss them off because he wants them to get vaccinated. Like he wants life to be a hassle for them, which to be honest, to me is kind of a duh statement. Like that's just sort of admitting bluntly what the purpose of vax mandates are. Vax mandates make your life difficult so that you get vaccinated. Like, let's not be precious about that. The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, had said he has very little patience left with the anti-vaxxers. There have been other comments like that. And here's the thing. I have no patience for anti-vaxxers. I got none. But one of the things that I was thinking about, I wrote about this quite a bit with John Wright of Meru Public Opinion here late last year. There is a sizable percentage of the Canadian population, 10%, we'll go just a round number, 10%, that has gone nuts and had probably, many of them had started to go nuts before the pandemic. There has been a convergence we've been seeing of the anti-vax views in Canada and sort of that pre-existing small fringe group of just whack jobs in this country. They are fueling each other and they're feeding off of each other. And at a certain point, they might just blur into each other and become indistinguishable. Sooner or later, this pandemic will be over. Maybe later. It feels like we keep saying that, but it will end eventually. We're still going to have maybe 10% of the population that's fucking crazy. What do we do with that? Like we're so stuck in this current crisis that I'm not sure we're thinking about what the next ones might be here. And I'm not saying we have the luxury of not dealing with this one. If you want to make me a specific proposal to do something to drive up the rate of vaccination, make it to me and we'll consider it on its merits. But I think we need collectively to be thinking about blowback and unintended consequences here. And I'm not saying this to excuse inaction, and I'm not ruling out any further steps. All I'm asking for is that we make a deliberate effort to at least be mindful of the fact that we will be stuck with that 10 to 15% of our population longer than we will be stuck with COVID-19.
The other thing that I would point out here is that I understand I completely empathize with the frustration against anti-vaxxers. I mean, you and I are both vaccinated. We've both been big on the vaccine. I think that I've always seen the vaccine as being our key out of this, and I think to a large extent it's proven to be so, even though it hasn't been quite the magic pill that I'd hoped it would have been. But the other thing I would point out is that I understand the anger, but just sort of imposing more difficulties and more mandates for the sake of taking it out on this section of the population that you're angry at isn't necessarily productive. And it especially isn't productive when we are at a point in the spread of the virus when this thing is going to rip through us. And even if we literally went house to house, forcibly jabbing everybody who had been not vaccinated to date, it's not going to make a significant difference, because the vaccines take a couple of weeks to take effect, and this wave will be over by the time that happens. So even if we had the logistical and frankly military capacity to literally force the anti-vaxxers to get vaccinated tomorrow, and we don't, by the way, we don't, it's not going to make a difference to this wave. It's just not. I mean, essentially Omicron, what it's proving to be is Omicron is proving to be the forced vaccination.
Yeah. No, I mean,
that's what it is.
I had told a pretty off-color joke early in the pandemic that we should find the postal codes with the lowest vax rate, and we should just have like guys in camouflage with like blow darts and little Pfizer darts going around going, poof, oh, you're vaccinated. Like, even if we did that now, which first of all would be hilarious, secondly would be wildly immoral and illegal, third, to your point, it's not going to stop what's coming. And this is the one thing I still think psychologically people have not been able to accept. The speed of Omicron is something wildly outside our earlier pandemic context. And it's not about embracing defeat or, because there's a column I'm working on. I wasn't able to get it ready this week. It's important to understand that some of what we might do to respond to Omicron could well be worth doing anyway. Like, it's like, yeah, you know what? Getting the vaccination rate higher is good. Boosting vulnerable groups is good. Getting our classrooms safer is good. But we do them because they're good, not because they're going to make a difference in the time available to us. And I think just in terms of the cost benefits of what we're dealing with for this wave of the pandemic, we need to understand that it will peak in days or weeks, not months like we've been dealing with.
We don't have the time to be imposing these sort of massive draconian policies just because it makes us feel better. Like that's not a use of a good use of resource. Now, if we were in a scenario where like the new variant comes along, or what's the next goddamn Greek letter?
I think.
Pi, the Pi variant comes along in 6 months. It's as virulent as Omicron. It completely escapes immunity, and it's got a mortality rate of 10%. Totally different conversation. Then I think we are totally justified to not literally start forcibly locking down low vaccine jurisdictions and like doing all kinds of draconian shit. But right now, that is not the situation we're in. And I think that there's every reason to be optimistic that Omicron's probably our last major wave, and it will serve as a forced vaccination for anybody who hasn't been vaccinated. More people will die, not a lot. And, I think that there's a very good odds that in 3 months, the pandemic will effectively be over.
I mean, from your lips to God's ears, I don't have a lot of optimism left in me after the last couple of years, but that would be awesome. So,
well, but then we're going to be in the thick of the next crisis, right? Like that's the other problem, is that I think the pandemic is at a near end. I really genuinely believe that. Someone clip that for when we're facing the next variant. But I genuinely believe that the pandemic's at an end. But I think that by the time we realize that, we'll be knee deep in the next problem.
On our list of topics as well, and it's related to this one, we've talked about the enforcement mechanisms or the shutdown mechanisms. Parts of the country have returned to shuttered schools, to virtual learning. My understanding, Jen, is that Alberta delayed the reopening of school, but has...
We're back on Monday.
Okay, so, all right. So Ontario has delayed it until January 17th, but no one actually believes it'll be January 17th. The Toronto Star reporting today in an interesting piece. You and I, as journalists, we can tell when a piece has been thoroughly reported. Like we know what to look for. the Toronto Star piece was not naming a lot of sources, but you can tell it was pretty authoritative. They obviously had the goods on this. The Ontario government is hyper aware of the fact that it is burning its, like, just a bonfire of political credibility right now. They want to get the schools open again as quickly as they can, and they're looking at reopening high schools. Okay, like, whatever.
Which is completely wrong, by the way, because if you're actually trying to stop transmission, you'd be opening elementary schools well before you'd be opening high schools. Like,
the high school kids are vaccinated. That's the argument.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is, as I said in a column I wrote a few days ago. I wrote it in the Dispatch on Monday for us, and I wrote it in a column for TVO. We never even looked at other options. Like, we never basically said, what could we do between a full-scale school closure and just open business as usual? We never even considered it. So at least, like, this is damning with faint praise, I know, but at least the Ontario government is now at least wondering how they can begin to unwind this. The thing that we have on our list, though, when Ontario announced that the schools were going to be closed for a while, and I know Quebec schools are going to be closed for a while as well, there was a hashtag that started going around on Twitter that was "Don't Log On." And basically, it was calling for a parental revolt, a strike from virtual school. I think there's a lot of reasons why that's impractical. Holy God, do I ever get the impulse?
Oh no, I don't think it's impractical. And if I think it's a moral imperative. And I think that that's what I'd like to write in the Dispatch, is that I think in Alberta, I'm in a good situation. We're going back on Monday. We've only had a week off. That's fine. Most of the world where Omicron is spreading, the schools are still open. Like Ontario, I don't think Ontario quite, don't take this the wrong way. Ontario is so central to its own self. It has its head so far up its ass, it doesn't even realize what's going on in other parts of the country, much less other parts of the world.
No, we fell really deeply into our own belly buttons.
Yeah. Ontario is a worldwide anomaly.
Yep.
Virtually no other jurisdiction is doing what Ontario is doing. What you're doing is just fucking insane. It doesn't make any sense. There's no scientific rationale for it. There's no reason why you should have your schools be shut down. You know, it's now pretty demonstrable that kids are not a vector. Vaccinated kids are not a vector. Younger kids were never a vector. So what you're doing is just stupid. It's just dumb. It's unjustifiable. And the problem that I have with online schooling is that it allows government and policy officials to maintain the illusion that everything's fine,
yep,
and at the expense of children and their parents. And I think that bluntly, it would be infinitely better for parents to try and coordinate amongst themselves, try and do like play dates among friends and try to trade each other's kids off among houses. You'd at least get some work in if you could do that and coordinate amongst yourselves. But failing that, let the kids just go run around, have fun, you know, try and take the stress or ease off them. The sham of online schooling is a sham. Nobody's actually learning. I mean, Shannon Proudfoot did a great piece in Maclean's this week, where she explains the practical realities of what online schooling is. No one's learning shit. All right, that's nonsense. And the more people who participate in the sham, the more the policymakers get to pretend that that is a viable policy option for dealing with COVID when it isn't. I think that actually staying out of a fake online schooling scenario is a moral imperative. I think that this is one of those cases where civic disobedience is absolutely necessary.
The problem with that, I agree with you in the main, but I'm going to tell you what the problem with that is. There is no reasonable prospect right now of a rapid reopening of schools in Ontario. Like, and the reason is because, and this is complicated stuff, the teachers unions will not permit the schools to reopen in Ontario. Like,
and that's fine. But even if staying away from online schooling has no practical impact on just increasing the reopening process, which I would grant you, I'll take your word for that. I still think it's better for the kids and it's better for the parents if they stop participating in this.
It depends. And the reason it depends is because my kids get some social value out of being in breakout rooms with their friends, of friends they would not be seeing right now. The value to them of online school is not zero. The educational value of online school, I would say, is pretty close to zero. It is keeping them distracted and it is keeping them somewhat entertained. It would be possible in some cases to do better. My family could do better. We could pull our kids out of virtual school and they would be fine. But that is a statement of, as the kids say, privilege. I think a lot of families that have less means than we do are probably barely hanging on, and online schooling is a really shitty life preserver for them. I could pull my kids out and we would be fine. A lot of other people couldn't, and I don't want to put a moral obligation on anyone else to do something that will harm them. Or
fair enough. So maybe I need to be a little bit gentler in my approach here. But like, I think that even if you are a low income family who's struggling on the brink, this is not a better scenario than meeting up with 5 of your neighbors with kids the same age and doing essentially a trade-off kind of scenario. Like, this is not cheaper, this is not better, because in an online school scenario, not only are your kids isolated, but you have to be there with them, so you can't do other work.
Somebody has to be.
Somebody has to be with them. So if you are in a scenario where you are a low income thing, my alternative protest plan is probably better for you than what the government is proposing. So, but you're right. I certainly grant that individual circumstances vary, and there are some people who are not going to be able to leave online schooling. And I would say granted. So maybe the way to say that is like, if you can find an alternative to participating in this sham, I'm going to argue you have a moral imperative to do so. You should not be participating in what everybody understands is a non-functional, non-sustainable system in order to make the government feel better about its bad decisions.
We have not made any decisions yet, but you and I spoke about this briefly yesterday. My gut feeling is anyone with any degree of affluence is looking at relocating for however long the school closure remains. Not gonna lie to you, I am looking every day at Airbnbs in the southern United States, because we can do virtual schooling and it can be warm. Like,
or you can just not do virtual schooling, just bail. Like, I mean, here's the other thing that I just get so angry about. Like, literally, this would be it would be better if the governments had literally just mailed everybody a paper copy of the annual syllabus, said, this is what we expect you to learn this year. You know, we'll provide some online options for people who want to be that, but this is the syllabus. Figure this out on your own time, figure this out on your own schedule. We'll do this online, but if you don't want to do this online, here's the syllabus. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and then provide maximum flexibility. Like that, it's not going to be any worse than what they've currently done, and it would prevent the sham, is what I'm saying. But I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, I know a lot of people who don't have kids who have just bailed on Canada if they could afford it. They just if their work allowed it, they've just left.
I know a bunch of Zoom workers who are in the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah.
And like, don't, like, bluntly, if I didn't have kids and if we weren't in Alberta, like, I've got a special needs kid who goes to a fantastic school here, and I can't deprive him of that. Mm-hmm. But if we didn't have kids, I'd be gone. I just be in California right now. Why?
You know what?
Like, why would you be here?
All I'm saying is that by the dispatch video of next week, this background may actually be San Francisco. Like,
you should go. If you can go, just go, because this is not, until this is over.
It's just a matter of family logistics at this point. Like, it's just whether or not it would be a hassle-free process. Speaking of travel, we are not writing it, but we will have a dispatch blurb about the party flight to Cancun that the Prime Minister was getting shirty about. So that's something people can look forward to. We have 3 items on the CBC here, and they're all very different, but they're all kind of about the CBC. So let's just kind of take them in sequence here, and let's be relatively terse about them, or else we'll just spend an hour talking about the broadcaster. You wanted to offer words of praise to the CBC.
Yeah, I did. So I think the CBC's announced that they're going to shift their focus. Like, the CBC's been quite hysterical on COVID, like insanely hysterical on COVID right from the beginning, but they said they're going to shift their focus from case counts to hospitalizations. Bluntly, I think that this is a shift that has been a long time coming, but with Omicron, it's especially necessary. There is no reason to be scaring the shit out of people about absolutely sky-high case counts. The issue now is hospitalizations. And I think that's correct. And I think that is a good decision by the broadcaster. And I good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Via con Dios. Second point is that, as a follow-up to the Tara Henley piece, I mean, people who've been read our dispatch at the beginning of the week will know what we're talking about. There is a CBC contract employee who quit and basically is like, it's impossible to actually have journalistic integrity at the CBC. It's basically so fucking woke. She wrote this piece, of course, predictable backlash, predictable nastiness. I mean, nobody would be surprised by the people who hated this and what they said. But there have been kind of three broad anti-terror handling narratives that have emerged that are probably worth noting. The first is that she's against diversity initiatives at the CBC. It's not what she said, and that's not the intention of her piece. That's disingenuous. The second was that this is all part of some grand grift. All you have to do is go say you're anti-woke, and all of a sudden, the wealth will be falling in on your head. Hate to break it to you guys, if it were that easy, I wish it were that easy. That's absolutely nonsense. If you want to make money in journalism, what do you think the easier path for you is going to be? Creating your own Substack.
It's not what we're doing.
Creating your own Substack as a low profile journalist, or time serving at CBC, taking your taxpayer cash. Yeah. I mean, the grifter is not the Substack person who has to work her ass off to build an audience to make like $20,000 a year here. That's self-evidently absurd. And anybody who looks at the numbers would agree. Like, the idea that like everybody on Substack is making Barry Weiss and Andrew Sullivan money is completely insane.
You and I are probably actually at the line. I don't know. I don't have numbers on this, but just based on my own conversations, we are probably one of the more successful Canadian Substacks.
I think we are.
And we could pay one person a modest income.
Yeah.
And so what that actually ends up meaning, well, I mean, and that would include there's costs of running a place like this. There's photo fees, there's corporate fees, there's insurance fees.
You could pay one of us about what I was making at the National Post.
And with a little bit left over to pay the writers. Like, that's right. Like, we are one of the bigger ones in Canada, and we could pay, well, you were being underpaid at the Post then, because you couldn't pay close what I was getting paid. Well, I was also a manager.
You were a senior manager and I wasn't.
Yeah. But yes, like, you and I combined have worked hard at this for 17 months, and we could pay our bills, pay our fees, pay our insurance, pay our writers, and pay one person a modest salary.
And I actually spoke to Tara about this before she decided to go off the cliff. I mean, I didn't say do it or don't do it, but she did some talking with some Substackers to get a sense of what she could do, and I was pretty blunt with her. I was like, you're not going to make a full-time wage doing this. Like, you will be able probably to make a small, reliable part-time wage that you will have to supplement with other freelance work. But like, I did not shoot any smoke or rainbows up her butt, and she seemed to understand that. She's not stupid. So the idea that this is all just, some easy money grift is a real bizarre misconception to me. And then the last narrative in all this is that she was a big nobody anybody. She was just a temporary employee and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so a couple things. There are lots and lots of longtime employees at the CBC who are on contract and on temporary contracts. That is very, very normal at the CBC. So by denigrating her work because she was a temporary contractor on an ongoing contract for like 13 years, you're also kind of just shitting on everybody at the CBC who's been on temporary contracts and stringing together work at that company for the last 10, 15 years. That's not abnormal. Lots of CBC employees have been on long-term temporary contracts.
I have held senior editorial roles at large Canadian media companies making well into the six figures on annually renewed temporary contracts. Like, if you think temporary contract is synonymous in the current Canadian media environment with like rookie low paid, you're wrong.
No,
and I didn't mind doing this. Like, this was advantageous for me just based on how I've structured my own business life. Like, I wasn't put out by it, but like, when I saw people going, oh, she was just a contract worker, an enormous amount of the journalists, including, I would say, some names you're all familiar with, are not fully employed full-time staff at whatever institution they've been at, even if they've been there for decades.
And the CBC is particularly notorious for this because they are such a rigid sort of union shop.
I didn't know that, to be honest. Like, I knew this was widespread. I've seen a lot of people saying the CBC is particularly bad at that. That was a surprise to me.
Well, it's because the union there is so strong that essentially once you make that bump into permanent a permanent position at the CBC, you are so protected by the union, or traditionally have been so protected by the union, that those sort of permanent jobs are extremely coveted. And like, once you're in, you're a lifer. Like, you never there. It's almost like becoming a tenured professor, right? So the CBC is particularly awful for this. The other thing I would also note about all of this is that, lastly, I mean, all of it is basically pettifogging about her credentials to avoid dealing with the question of whether or not she's writing is true.
Yeah.
Like, it completely avoids the truth claim. Like, nobody's even really attempting to dispute the environment that she's describing is literally happening or is true. They're just saying she's a big baddie. And to me, that's always a giant red flag when I start to see that kind of rhetorical impulse. So I think, just like, I'm not here to, I don't want to put my entire personal reputation on the line for Tara Henley, because bluntly, like, I don't know where she's going to go with this Substack. I mean, like, who knows where she goes with it? But I do think noting the three major narratives of the anti-Tara Henley witch hunt, which is what it's becoming. It's becoming, she's becoming a scapegoat for a lot of different issues in Canadian media. And just noting that a lot of those narratives are flatly bunk and they don't make sense. And they're strategically designed to undermine her to avoid dealing with the truth claim. I think making that note is worthwhile.
I would say this. Can I just make one point before we move on to that last point? You have spoken to Henley. I never have. I, to my knowledge, I've never met or spoken with this woman. And if I have, Tara, and I've simply forgotten it, sorry, I have homeschooling 2-year pandemic brain.
She interviewed me for the Globe article she did. Anyway.
So the only thing I would say with this, Jen, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. You've spoken to her. You don't have to confirm or deny this. The impression I have of just watching this a little bit is that she chose to make herself a combatant in the culture wars and seems to be surprised to be in a war.
A little bit, yeah.
Where I have seen this before with journalists who, as we've jokingly said, have sort of red pilled and decided to go out, where you can't even debate these ideas anymore. And then they're shocked to find that they can't debate these ideas anymore. Sometimes they understand the bitter resistance to some of these discussions on an intellectual level, but they are not prepared for the emotional impact of actually making yourself a combatant in the culture war. Yeah. I am a combatant in the culture war. I'm not a particularly enthusiastic one. I think culture wars are stupid. I think culture wars are like nuclear wars. Even if you win, you fuck everything up. Like, there's no way to win a culture war. So I try to avoid these things to the extent possible. But there are times in our line of work when you do find yourselves on the front line of a culture war. It is astonishingly unpleasant. And I think if you do not have preparedness for that, if you do not have a thick skin, if you are not naturally sort of able to withstand that sort of thing, it is a lot. And I think it is especially a lot. We hear stories about this all the time. Some anonymous office worker in Idaho has a bad tweet, and all of a sudden they're all over the world. And it's sort of like you go from total obscurity to being a figure in the culture wars, hated by one side, loved by the other, and it can fuck you up. And you and I spoke about this off air, so I don't mean to blow any confidences here, but can you imagine what Lindsay Shepard's life would have been like if she had not done that whole thing at Wilfrid Laurier University? Like,
or I mean, if she had been more appropriately guided after, or better prepared, or more appropriately guided after she became famous. I mean, this is the other thing that I think is different, is that, the path to being a public figure used to be a fairly gradual, yeah. And it used to be something that you were, I mean, I started writing my first columns at 19. I had editors around me who were like, I don't think you really want to say that, because some people might want to push, like, so you had challenges, you had people helping you grow into that role.
Yeah.
And now that whole system is gone. And I think that the end result is that, you don't have guidance, you don't have psychological guidance, you don't have people around you to sort of help you to deal with the emotional pressures of that. And I think it as a result, you see people like Lindsay Shepard who went a lot off the rails, or you see the Faith Goldie types who just go a lot off the rails. And it's quite sad, and it particularly seems to be women are very vulnerable to this. So yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, my advice to Tara is, ultimately you're going to be judged by your work, not by how bitter, angry people on Twitter respond to you. That's not how people bitter, angry leftists on Twitter have been, and right people on conservatives on Twitter have been saying nasty things about me for literally years, decades. It's never hurt me. It hasn't. And ultimately how people are going to judge you is by the work you produce. And that's it. So that's what she needs to focus on. But I think that's right. I'm not entirely sure that she was prepared for how big that was going to get, and how much she was going to be castigated as a combatant in a much deeper war.
If she wasn't prepared for it, with respect to her, that was naive. She plopped herself down in the middle of the battlefield, ran up her flag and opened fire, and then, again, this is just my impression, seemed to be shocked when people shot back. So we'll see. Right. And again, I don't mean that in any way to deny what she was saying, because what she was saying, my understanding of both the modern newsroom environment and in conversations with CBC people in particular, including now some former CBC people, is that there was a lot of truth in what she was saying. Not that she was totally right. She might have overstated her case. One woman's perspective doesn't capture the entire institution, but there is value in what she is saying. And I think you're right that people don't want to have that conversation. They want to go after her on the other things.
The other thing that I would also note on all of this is just like, when you find yourself a combatant in the culture war, and especially if you didn't mean to be, that act can be polarizing and it can be radicalizing. Like you can start.
We've both seen this.
Oh yeah, you can start on this fight by saying like, I just want to speak my truth, man.
Yeah.
And then you become like the big baddie of a particular side or that side, and then you respond to this like polarizing cycle that makes you more and more and more extreme, because it's like, no, fuck you, and you wind up on a place you didn't expect to wind up in.
And I think you do the very human thing, and you hang out with the people who tell you you're awesome and brave, not the people who tell you you're worthless and shit.
Yeah, exactly.
And then maybe a couple of years later, you look around, you're like, wow, why am I a neo-Nazi? Well,
yeah. But you and I have both seen this. Really good, smart, reasonable people wind up becoming the villains of the day, and responding to that by becoming what they were made out to be. So anyway, I don't really want to get into that depth in the dispatch, but I'm just saying, I just think it's worth pointing out. Here are the three narratives I'm seeing on the anti-Tara Henley side. Here's where I think they're not bullshit, and ultimately I think that they're about just avoiding the truth claims that she's bringing up. The last thing on that CBC file was Aaron O'Toole responded to the Tara Henley in a tweet and said, like, basically it's time for a mandate review. What I think is interesting about that is the politics behind that, because firstly, 5 years ago, would we see a conservative leader, like not just someone, a candidate, but an actual conservative leader, be like, mandate review for the CBC? I don't think that we would have. I think that would have been considered a radical, suicidal position for a conservative leader to take. But I think the CBC is so lost the middle, the red Tory middle, and I think it's lost enough support even among the left that a conservative leader can now openly call for a mandate review and have that basically be more or less an acceptable position. Like, I think the Overton window on CBC funding has massively opened in the last 18 months as a result of their sort of ideological shift. And the end result is also, I would say, O'Toole, of course, has to try and regain support among his base who think he's basically not conservative.
Yeah.
My God, what a beautiful bone could he throw. If he were the conservative leader who did what even Harper wouldn't do, and that is openly held a mandate review on CBC funding, that would be a bone to his conservative base. And if he could do that without alienating too much of the left or the center, which I think he can today, the CBC is putting itself in a very, very vulnerable position here. And
it has been for years. It's been cruising for the bruising for a while, and it's completely oblivious about it.
It is. So I think that there's a political analysis on there that's worth doing, even if it's just a short one. So those are my 3 CBC stories.
The one thing I would mention before we wrap this thing up is it's been interesting because a couple of debates kind of unfolding in parallel this week. The CBC is one of them. I think Canadian healthcare is another. And while you and I are doing this video, I think my latest TVO column is being published, where the entire thesis of the column is, I think everybody in this country would agree with the following statement: Canadian healthcare can and should be better. You'd get 40 million people who agree with that. The moment you try to add one more sentence to that, it becomes a shit show of a debate, right? And I think with healthcare and with the CBC, I think everyone who has anything to say about it just gets lumped into one ideological camp or another based on their ideological priors. It's like, oh, okay, well, Gurney wants healthcare to be better. Oh, he's generally conservative, therefore he wants American style healthcare. Aaron O'Toole comes out and goes, we need a mandate review, and people go, oh, so you want to scrap the CBC? Like, we are left unable in this country to have conversations about reforming essential services that 14 million of us would agree in the abstract need to be reformed. And if you want to know why we have no state capacity, why we have an increasingly apathetic and dysfunctional and angry population, it's because we can't even talk about the things that need to be talked about. And we're surprised that they never get fixed. So that's all I've got.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. But I actually think that's a column, not a dispatch. Okay, so what do you want to take here? You obviously want to take the blowback.
Yeah, I'll do blowback. I mean, I'll just basically rewrite my tweets into column form. Yeah. Do you want me to do mandate for CBC and then you do Henley and the praise for CBC?
Yeah, but the other thing I would just ask you to do is just make note of the fact that the Overton window on the CBC has been shifted because of a strict result of their own ideological position. So you'll take basically the O'Toole mandate.
Yep. You'll do praising its COVID counting.
And then I do parent revolt, I guess.
We'll do parent revolt. Revolt, but let me take a look at that.
Oh yeah, we'll do a little bit. We'll mush our ideas together on that.
Tag team. All right. Anything else?
I think that's it.
That's it. All right, folks. We've been commissioned. This is our first half week back. We've been commissioning work. We've got our writers working on stuff. I don't know what's going to land yet for next week, but we'll have some stuff for you. A reminder: until Sunday, there is one last chance to subscribe for a 10% discount. It's the last chance you're going to get. We're not doing another sale for a while, so jump in now if you want to. That's it from us, from Jen in Calgary, from me at Starfleet headquarters. Have an amazing weekend. We'll talk to you soon.